In the blistering desert of New Mexico, where the wind howls through red canyons and the earth itself seems to guard its secrets, one question has haunted investigators and dreamers alike for half a century. What exactly was discovered at Chaco Canyon in 1972, and why was it hidden away so quickly? Was it merely an archaeological curiosity, a bureaucratic overreaction, or something so extraordinary that silence was the only response? This isn't just a tale of pottery shards and broken murals. It's about power, secrecy, and the uncomfortable possibility that our understanding of human history is incomplete, or worse, deliberately manipulated. Three hikers, ordinary people chasing adventure under the scorching sun, stumbled into what looked like nothing more than a fissure in the rock. What they found inside would change their lives forever. The air was cool, almost impossibly stable compared to the blistering desert heat outside. The chamber held artifacts consistent with an ancient culture, pottery, stone tools, weapons. But resting among them was something that shattered expectations, a metallic, compass-like object inscribed with runes no one recognized, crafted from an alloy unknown to 8th century science. How could such a thing exist? Their discovery should have sparked celebration. Instead, it triggered a lockdown. Within 48 hours, convoys of military trucks rolled across the desert floor. Helicopters hovered above. Agents in dark suits swarmed the canyon, their voices sharp, their orders final. The chamber was sealed, the artifacts packed into crates, and the hikers quietly dismissed. Local authorities were told little. Records evaporated. All that remained was a name whispered with unease: Project Ancient Arrow. But why the secrecy? If this was simply a misdated relic, why summon the full weight of federal power? Why not publish the findings, display them in museums, and celebrate a unique moment in archaeology? Eyewitnesses described the scene: soldiers hammering shut wooden crates while archaeologists wept openly, powerless as priceless history vanished under armed guard. One woman clutched a broken shard, whispering through tears that the past was being erased before her very eyes. The convoys disappeared into the night, headlights cutting across barren flats. Helicopter rotors thundered overhead, scattering sand like smoke. And then, silence. The chamber was sealed behind steel plates, the entrance camouflaged to blend with canyon rock. For outsiders, nothing had ever been there. For those who had witnessed it, only nightmares remained. Yet fragments of the story escaped. Late-night diners saw weary men scribbling runes on napkins. Radio hosts hinted at strange military operations in the desert. Archaeologists carried sketches in hidden notebooks, haunted by symbols they dared not publish. These whispers weren't enough to prove anything, but they were too consistent to dismiss entirely. They suggested a hidden truth gnawing just beneath the surface. So what was this object? A tool? A weapon? A message? If it truly came from the 8th century, how could it be forged from a future alloy? And if it came from somewhere else, then who placed it here, and for what purpose? Skeptics argue it was a misidentification, a coincidence inflated by rumor. But believers insist it was proof that our timeline isn't as fixed as we think, that something or someone has touched our history before. The silence of official records only deepens the mystery. More than 800 archaeological projects have been documented in the region since the 1950s. None mention a hidden chamber. None acknowledge confiscated crates or soldiers patrolling canyon floors. Historians note that absence itself can be telling. If nothing was found, why does the story persist? If everything was ordinary, why remember it at all? Today, the canyon is quiet. Tire tracks have eroded under decades of wind. Floodlights are long gone. To the casual hiker, the cliffs rise untouched, majestic and empty. But to those who know the story, the silence feels deliberate. It feels like a veil. Eyewitnesses still describe what they saw: walls polished to an impossible smoothness, pigments that shimmered and shifted under light, and the strange metallic object that seemed to hum faintly when held. One archaeologist swore it pulsed in his hands, almost like it was alive, or waiting. His claims were dismissed as stress or delusion, but he never recanted. Another witness described how soldiers avoided touching the artifact directly, sliding it into a crate with metal rods, as if even they sensed it carried something beyond their understanding. And so, the debate endures. Was Project Ancient Arrow a genuine government cover-up of anomalous artifacts, a first contact buried under secrecy? Or was it a myth born from fear, confusion, and exaggeration? Some call it folklore. Others call it evidence of hidden chapters in human history. The truth, perhaps, lies somewhere in between. Skeptics say, if the government had really found an impossible artifact, why has no proof ever surfaced? Believers counter, isn't the absence of evidence exactly what you'd expect from a cover-up? If agencies had the power to remove the chamber, to erase its records, then silence isn't evidence of nothing. It's evidence of something powerful enough to hide. What makes the story endure is not just the artifact, but the way it was handled. The weeping archaeologists, the soldiers guarding crates as if they contained nuclear secrets, the sealed canyon walls. Even if one rejects the more extraordinary claims, the actions themselves raise uncomfortable questions. Why so much force for so little explanation? But here's what cannot be denied. Legends matter. They keep questions alive. They remind us that history is fragile, vulnerable to erasure, and shaped by those who control the narrative. The canyon walls may be silent, but silence itself can be revealing. Was the discovery truly forgotten or deliberately buried? And if it was buried, what else lies hidden, waiting for the right eyes to stumble across it? This was only the beginning. What started in 1972 was not just an archaeological anomaly. It was the opening move in a larger story, one of secrecy, power, and the possibility that humanity's greatest mysteries still lie beneath our feet. Once a door like this is glimpsed, it can never truly be closed. In the summer of 1994, when a sleepy season of storms finally settled over northern New Mexico, a rockslide in Chaco Canyon did more than shift stone. It shifted certainty. Rangers radioed a discovery that read like a mistake, an opening so rectangular it looked less carved than poured from light. By noon the next day, pickup trucks had become convoys. Curiosity had become protocol. Inside, a corridor spiraled up through living rock, a double helix you could walk, polished smooth as if heat, not tools, had shaped it. Pigments along the walls seemed to breathe under lamps. One linguist whispered that the patterning felt like syntax for the body, as if the makers expected a human nervous system to read it. The rooms, 23 before the map ran cold, offered puzzles dressed as artifacts, crystalline instruments that hummed without power, star fields that matched no chart, were scuffs exactly where human hands would have lived. And then there was the disc. On a pedestal in chamber 23 lay something thicker than glass, smoother than stone. Under white light, it was obstinate, a mirror that refused reflection. Under ultraviolet, symbols surfaced in layers, as if pages of a book had collapsed into one plane. Microscopes found nothing to focus on. Scanners returned noise that mimicked signal. The object behaved, if that's the word, like a memory that would not be recalled by anyone it did not trust. Witness accounts split along a familiar fault. A materials scientist claims he felt a slight compression above the disc, a pressure that rose and fell like breathing. A ranger swears soldiers used hooked rods rather than gloves to slide it into its case. They were tough guys until they were close to it, she says. Then they got gentle. A young private later dreamed in spirals for a week. Skeptics, steady as bedrock, ask for chain of custody and primary sources. They point to cognitive strain, to confirmation bias under fluorescent light at 3 a.m., to how quickly myth colonizes gaps. A geophysicist suggests the corridor's glassy finish might be vitrified tough, lava glass polished by time. A historian notes that unknown pigment often means we didn't run the right test. Believers counter with anomalies that refuse to sit still. Why did UV produce structured rune fields while visible light did not? Why did the disk ignore electron microscopy yet respond to angle and voice, as if alignment, not brute force, were the key? Why the consistency of testimonies from people who never met, whose lives share only a canyon, a week, and a silence? And why, if this was just geology, did the convoys arrive like a fire alarm? In the temporary lab, debates sounded like prayer and like argument. Was the disk storage, volumetric, photonic, something that encodes in phase rather than substrate? Or was it an interface, a door that expects an operator who knows how to knock? One linguist proposed the spiral chambers were an initialization ritual, the body walking the helix, heart rate in training to glyph rhythms. So by chamber 23 the visitor is tuned, like an instrument ready to sound. Security culture pressed back. Agents logged hypotheses like inventory. Containment floated more than publication. You could hear the room divide. Scientists asking for controlled disclosure. Officers tightening the circle. An administrator reciting policy. The oldest question in research, who owns discovery, sat between them and refused to move. There were human edges too. A researcher tearing out notebook pages when an agent leaned too far. A forgotten recorder capturing 30 minutes of silence punctuated by one clean, impossible chime. A lab assistant tracing symbols onto her wrist because it felt like a map. Alternative explanations multiplied, as they should. Hoax? If so, by whom? And to what end, when the cost of staging such a site would dwarf the gain? Misreading? Always possible. Science is a long history of beautiful wrong turns. Prototype? A remnant of a classified materials program, misfiled into the past, and now inconveniently rediscovered. By dawn the chamber was almost empty. Crates sealed, pedestals bare. Only the disc remained. Then it, too, was boxed, metal over metal with the hush of a theater curtain, and the procession marched out under a sky so blue it felt new. In the days that followed, the canyon wore its blankness like a mask. Sand erased boot prints. A slab smoothed the threshold into geology. Paperwork shrank wonder into paragraphs, and then, rumor says, redactions. Underground, the work continued. The disc stayed mute under brute analysis and mischievously responsive under ritual. Angle, breath, tone, time. A pattern began to whisper through the noise. The same pattern that haunted 1972. Discovery, seizure, containment. Which leaves us with hypotheses, and with you. If the corridor is a machine, what is it machine? If the disk is memory, whose is it? And who is meant to remember? If it is neither, if it is art, why does it behave like instruction? Perhaps the simplest answer is the most unsettling. We are not the audience. Not yet. Or consider another possibility. The site is a test, not of intelligence, but of temperament. Do we meet the unknown with extraction or with listening? Did we fail by arriving with floodlights and forklifts when the architecture asked for patience and song? What if the disk was waiting for a question we did not think to ask? One that cannot be typed, only lived. Skeptics will, and should, favor rigor. Believers will, and should, ask for courage in the face of data that returns only silence. Between them is a territory worth defending. The place where curiosity outruns certainty, where we admit that some doors open inward, and only when we learn to turn the handle the way it was intended. Chaco Canyon offers no epilogue. It offers the same wind, the same sunrises that paint the walls the color of ash and fire. What changed is us. We carry a new absence now, a doorway-shaped hole that cannot be filled by denial or belief, only by better questions. And that may be the instruction the site always held. If you want more than answers, ask like a patient guest, not a conqueror. Until we do, the record will remain what it is. Arguments in fluorescent rooms, dreams and spirals, a few sketches, and a convoy disappearing into the night. Was Chamber 23 a library, a lock, a lure? The canyon does not say. The canyon waits. And in the waiting, the story persists, insisting that history is not a wall we ride upon, but a corridor we must learn, slowly, to walk. In 2011, the silence around Chaco Canyon began to crack, not with a press release, but with whispers. A journalist met a source in a desert motel where neon hummed and dust scraped across the balcony rail. What she heard felt less like gossip and more like confession. Crates sealed at night, murals that shifted under certain lights, and a disc that seemed to resist being understood. She pressed record, and a story buried for decades began to breathe again. The fragments emerged slowly. A historian scrolling microfilm found procurement memos, fuel logs, and signatures absent from public rosters. None of it proved the extraordinary, but all of it showed that something had bent ordinary bureaucracy around an absence. Small truths, carefully stacked, carried more weight than one spectacular claim. Filmmakers joined the chase. They set up cameras in the dust and asked hard questions. A retired archaeologist spoke of walls that shimmered, pigments alive with subtle color shifts, and symbols that seemed to vibrate when approached. His voice cracked when he admitted, "It felt like being watched, but not by a person, by the place itself." A former soldier tapped a map and muttered, "The door we made to close a door we found." He described the air tightening around the artifact, and how men who never flinched stepped back. The crew caught his hesitation when the word "disc" entered the room. A whistleblower handed them a folder, requisitions for vault doors, references to optical containment, and a maintenance log from 1994 that aligned with the canyon's sudden closure. He whispered, "They boxed it like a memory." The phrase stuck, raw and unpolished, the kind of line people invent when truth leaves them no other language. The trail led to a warehouse. Dust covered empty shelves, but a soldier's diary page remained. Symbols bright when we moved, dull when we stopped. It read, like a man struggling to talk himself out of what he saw. A local rancher they later interviewed recalled seeing convoys at night. They weren't hauling supplies. They were hauling something that made them drive without headlights. Skeptics dismissed it as embellishment. Yet his story, like others, rhymed with fragments from people who never met. Then came the diner meeting. Unmarked sedans idled outside while inside. A nervous man spoke of optical media in a strained tone. His folder contained timestamps and a blurry image of a glowing spiral. Each door chime raised the stakes. The waitress poured coffee that went untouched. Everyone knew the room was already compromised. The escape was chaos. Backpacks stuffed with papers, a car that stalled before catching, headlights that clung like predators. The camera rolled, shaky but invaluable. A flash drive slipped to the floor and was found by sound, not sight. Later, a filmmaker said that was the point. Truth is small in the dark, and survival depends on instinct. The chase spilled into desert flats. Searchlights combed the horizon. Helicopters circled. Someone whispered their childhood street name, holding on to memory for courage. The crew split. One to run loud, one to flee wide, one to hide the drive under rock. One filmmaker stood empty-handed in searchlights to draw them away. Documentary footage showed fear and resolve colliding in the same breath. The skeptics weighed in. A geologist explained how lava glass can mimic polish. A historian noted that classified invoices often sound mysterious when stripped of context. A psychologist said adrenaline rewrites memory. These critiques mattered. They keep stories honest. But anomalies resisted easy dismissal. Ultraviolet patterns that acted like layered text, murals glowing brighter with heartbeats, and corridors shaped like helixes that seemed to tune footsteps into rhythm. If this was art, it was art behaving like instruction. And if instruction, then who was the intended student? Believers countered with urgency. "We don't bury folklore in vaults guarded by soldiers," one researcher said. "We bury danger or power." They argued the secrecy itself was proof that silence on this scale is never about protecting archaeology, but about controlling what cannot yet be explained. By dawn, the canyon looked unchanged. Cliffs, sand, a sky vast enough to swallow doubt. Yet those who carried fragments away were not unchanged. They mailed copies of files to contacts they barely trusted. They stashed a drive where only a margin map could retrieve it. One ranger, asked for her view, simply said, "The place has patience." Perhaps that is the real test. Not our tools, but our temperament. Do we meet the unknown with extraction or with listening? Do we box it like contraband or approach it as a guest? Legends remind us that knowledge is not just what we discover, but how we carry it. The film does not claim the last word. It claims responsibility, to keep debate alive, to resist the gravity of silence. Legends endure not because they are certain, but because they keep asking. And maybe Chamber 23 waits not for instruments, but for patience. By the end of 2011, the canyon remained itself. Wind through juniper, light on stone, a sky like a verdict. The filmmakers left with less than they wanted, more than they expected, contradictions heavy as stone, fragile evidence, and the recognition that some doors only open inward once we stop trying to force them. So the question turns to us. If the unknown is a test, what does it test? Our intelligence or our humility? When Chamber 23 demands proof, maybe the fairest answer is persistence. To keep walking, to keep asking, to keep the light moving across the wall until the wall itself decides to speak. By 2016, the story that once lived in whispers began to surface in places that can't whisper: screens, papers, feeds. It didn't arrive as revelation so much as a leak you can't unclench. Timestamps, requisitions, grainy photos of murals that seemed to change under light. A young reporter read each line into a recorder like a spell against vanishing. The tape word. The room held its breath. The new documents didn't prove the extraordinary, they bent the ordinary. A maintenance log snapped into shape beside a convoy manifest, and an order for a vault door heavier than reason. Notes about resonance corridors sounded like jargon until they were pinned beside a geologist's description of vitrified stone, a linguist's spiral sketches, and a ranger's memory that sound went strange in certain halls. It wasn't proof, it was gravity, pulling fragments into a common orbit. In basements and spare rooms, independent researchers threaded clippings like stars. One mapped the murals to constellations and found alignments that tracked interval rather than distance, as if the walls indexed time. Another noticed phrases repeating across decades. Air got tight. Symbols bright when we moved. Coincidences that rhymed too precisely to ignore. A third said the place felt designed for a listener, not a spectator. Newsrooms became their own thriller. Editors weighed risk against responsibility. A veteran warned the junior reporter, "They don't have to prove you wrong, only make you tired." She nodded and kept typing. Draft 1 accused. Draft 2 pleaded. Draft 3 did the only honest thing. Laid out verifiable facts and left the edges visible. The counter-narrative mobilized. A spokesperson recited lines crafted to leave no fingerprints. Nothing to confirm, nothing to deny. Skeptics amplified the ordinary. Geology explains polish. Bureaucracy explains paper trails. Stress explains miracles. The film keeps those voices, because a sturdy story can stand inside cross-examination. Then the plates began to sing. Couriers carried sealed envelopes through dawn streets toward a press that eats hesitation. In homes and trains, headlines landed like a tool on concrete. A teacher lifted the paper and a classroom leaned forward. A retired archaeologist touched an old sketch and whispered, "I thought I made it up." Protests followed, not choreographed but compelled. Cardboard questions, drumbeat answers. What is Chamber 23? Why were crates sealed at night? Who owns the past? In one live stream, a woman raised a sign that said, "Listen." The chant around her softened to a word that felt like instruction more than demand. Studios turned debate into programming. Panels split. A scientist for open archives, a skeptic for rigor, a historian for transparency, a former officer reading lines that sounded smaller than the room. The moderator reached for certainty and came back with questions. Viewers, for once, seemed satisfied. Doubt felt cleaner than pre-packaged closure. The film lingers on ordinary people in the blast radius of an extraordinary claim. The courier who accepted an envelope and slept better than the editor who sealed it. The press worker who watched ink meet paper and understood how physical truth can be. The park ranger unfolding the morning edition at the Overlook, reading as if hiking a familiar trail one more time to see what he'd missed. There were scares. A progress bar stuck at 98% while someone counted breaths in a dark car. Headlights that refused to pass. A duplicate drive hidden under a dashboard panel, another tucked into a newspaper rack. These moments didn't make the story truer, they made it human. Public talk tilted from "is it real?" to "what if it is?" Believers argued for daylight. Release inventories, declassify reports, test the murals with open protocols, and publish the raw. Skeptics demanded restraint. Stop mythologizing anomalies. Build a hypothesis that survives a lab. Between them stood a small middle asking a narrower question. What if the site is not a treasure, but a teacher? If the corridor is an instrument, what cadence does it ask of us? If the disk is memory, whose memory is it? And what temperament earns reply? That question changed tactics. The filmmakers stopped dramatizing conclusions and studied choreography, how bodies move near the unknown. We watched breath steady at a mural, footsteps fall into time within a spiral hall, heart rate monitors climb as symbols brightened. Correlation isn't causation, but a trail is how you learn to walk without getting lost. Printing night ended in a hush the size of consequence. Plates took ink, paper took weight, truth, or the best we can responsibly call it, took shape by the palette. People say newspapers are dying. Maybe. Yet there is nothing like the shudder of a press when a secret steps into daylight. Morning arrived with the patience of stone. Commuters read in kitchens and subways. Arguments bloomed in cafes. A child traced a spiral on a window while a parent chose to turn up the volume. Maps of New Mexico, briefly, felt personal everywhere. What changed? Not the canyon. Wind still combed the juniper. Light still repainted rock on the hour. What changed is us. We learned how heavy rumor becomes when paper agrees to carry it. We learned skepticism is a compass in good faith and a wall when used to stop the walk. We learned institutions can say nothing to report, while receipts ask for steel and silence. So where does this go? If the murals are calendars of interval, the better question may be, when are they for? If the corridor is tuned, what music does it expect? If the disc is conversation, who is the intended guest? The film refuses to answer for you. It holds up a mirror to a hallway and invites you to step forward. By evening, the streets were loud and the canyon quiet. The arrangement both seemed to prefer. One makes noise so the other can keep meaning. A ranger tucked the paper under his arm and watched a tourist stare too long at an ordinary wall, listening for a frequency most of us forget. He did not intervene. He practiced patience. What a documentary can promise at day's end is modest and real. The record is no longer only rumor. It has a date, a headline, a ledger of those who risked and those who refused. Whether Chamber 23 is machine, scripture, or meticulous misunderstanding, the ethical debt is the same. Open the archives, invite independent tests, treat the past like a partner rather than property. Until then, the canyon keeps its counsel. The wind turns pages we cannot see, and our task is stubborn persistence. Keep walking, keep asking, keep the light moving across the wall until the wall decides to answer back. Night did not end so much as thin. The highway out of Chaco ran like a wire pulled through the dark, and a single car rode it with a plume of dust unraveling behind. Inside, a reporter whispered time stamps to steady her breathing, the recorder on the passenger seat blinking like a small star. By morning the city rose ahead, glass, traffic, the open mouth of another day. It is always strange when the private weight of a secret passes into the bright anonymity of public life. We watched her fold the flash drive into a heel, tape a second copy under the dash, and will into an underground garage. Truth traveled in plastic, ink, and sweat. Back at the canyon, the wind changed. Helicopters skimmed the rim, their rotors combing the air. A team in night vision searched for what cannot be searched for: intent. A researcher, breath shallow, put a palm near a mural and watched the lines wake as if they were listening. He settled for a small sentence. Something responds when we do. Then sand rose. The canyon has a way of deciding who gets to stay. We heard radio codes cut to static and the soft animal sound a person makes when they're learning, too late, that the ground does not belong to them. Under a boulder, a journalist counted heartbeats and kept recording. The drive slipped from her fingers, and a camera caught only a hand, quick and sure, moving a truth from seen to unseen. There was a moment, brief and absolute, when everyone stopped. The dust drew back like a curtain and the murals glowed, not blazing, but certain. Even the pursuers lowered their rifles. You don't have to share a faith to recognize a threshold. The canyon held its breath. What followed was not victory, but survival. The helicopters retreated, the convoy idled. On foot, the crew walked toward dawn with a recorder, a notebook, and a sentence that kept repeating on the tape like a drumbeat. The chamber remembers. In the cities, headlines multiplied. Newsrooms argued about verbs. Reveals was too strong, suggests too soft. The proofs came off the press warm as bread. The story did not become simpler, it became shared. Crowds returned to the streets, louder now, but not cruel. A child rode on a mother's shoulders and traced the spiral on a cardboard sign. In studios, the debate hardened into programming blocks. A scientist with open data, a skeptic with steady counters, a historian reminding everyone that secrecy is not stewardship. Viewers discovered that the right question can be more satisfying than the wrong answer. Back at the rim, a ranger did what rangers do. He watched. He explained. He set a boundary with a rope, not as a dare, but as an invitation. You can look, but you must also listen. He knelt beside a child and drew the spiral slowly, showing how light falls across it in steps, not a wash. "It's a metronome," he said, "if you bring your own time." The leak found every channel. An archivist in a cold room bathed declassified diagrams in ultraviolet and saw overprint bloom, spirals keyed to latitudes, notes tight as stitches. A historian traced a petroglyph and looked up as if the ceiling had spoken. A lone soldier in plain clothes stood at the canyon edge and watched a crowd ask his questions out loud for him. Night returned to the tents along the ridge. The camera found faces lit by fire, recording arguments that were really a kind of love. Publish everything. Hold back coordinates. Encrypt and scatter. Invite the tribes. Invite the labs. The recorder captured exhaustion, gratitude, and the steady, unglamorous discipline of people who know that the only way through a maze is to move, and to mark your trail as you go. Sometime after midnight, the ranger took a lantern and walked the trail alone. The microphone heard a hum, and the lantern light curled along the mural as if offered a path. He whispered, "Still alive," and the sound his voice made in that space is the closest thing this film has to an answer. Dawn came back. A whistleblower climbed a plywood stage and passed out copies that flew apart in the wind. A sheet landed at a child's feet with a spiral so clean you could mistake it for a toy. She folded it into her pocket the way you fold a future you're not ready to read. And then the ending that isn't one. The overlook emptied. The reporter zipped the recorder into a bag, the zipper sounding like a lock. The ranger dropped the chain across the trail. What do we claim, after all this, beyond footage and breath? We can say that secrecy met its match in persistence. We can say that an old place revealed exactly as much as it wished, and that was enough to rearrange a map most of us carry inside. The film avoids the word proof for the same reason the canyon avoids spectacle. Both tend to end the story too soon. What we offer is a record of witnesses, documents, and nights spent in wind. What we offer is a portrait of people learning how to hold uncertainty without dropping it. What we offer, finally, is a choice. You can treat the unknown like contraband, box it, write euphemisms until the file feels like truth. Or you can meet it like a guest. Clear a space, bring your best questions, and let the room be quiet. One path builds walls, the other builds rooms. So the last line belongs to the place. When the sun schemes the spiral, there is a pulse, so subtle you could call it imagination and keep walking. Or you might stop, the way the crowd did, and measure your own breathing against a pattern older than your language. If you do, listen for what the chamber keeps saying to anyone patient enough to hear. I remember. Do you?